coaches, welcome back to another Modern Soccer Coach interview. Big one today. Nick Levett worked at the FA for 12 years, also worked with Brighton. Currently director of Rivers of Thinking, specialist in high performance, culture, organizational structure, all these great things that, of course, we need to have today in our environments. We're going to talk about that there. We're also going to talk about his work with the FA, his experiences with the FA and Gareth Southgate and the work that was done there with the England DNA many years ago. You're going to love this. Hope you enjoy it. Please give it a like. Please subscribe. Thank you so much for the support. Here's Nick. Enjoy. Nick, thank you so much for joining me today on the Modern Soccer Coach podcast. Finally, excited to have you on.
No, thank you for the invitation. It feels like it's a good and interesting platform, doing some good stuff, and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, no, I think we're going to get into a few things today that I think are really interesting. Culture. I mean, how long has culture been a buzzword? But it's still there. It's still something that is almost the promised land, that teams want to create this culture, this special environment for players. We're talking specifically youth level as well. So how do you create that? We'll get into that there. But the first question I wanted to throw at you would be, how would you define culture at a youth organization?
Yeah, it's a big question, and I think people will have their own metrics possibly about how they would kind of describe it. I often think it's the tangible feel that you get when you go into somewhere. It's the behaviors that people are exhibiting, because that's the stuff that you see on the surface. It's the conversations that you have. Ultimately, you want a culture that people are desperate to be part of and don't want to leave. And if you're having the opposite problem, is that they don't want to be there and they do leave, then I think there's something quite challenging, and you need to kind of get into about what's right and what's wrong. But people will define culture in terms of how they want it to be. But for me, and certainly in that kind of youth space, we're talking about the development of young people and using football as the vehicle, using soccer as the vehicle to do. I won't be able to stop saying football, Gary. It's the English in me, I'm afraid. So your listeners are going to have to deal with it, I'm afraid. But we have this wonderful tool to use to help to develop young people. And the culture for me of a grassroots soccer club, certainly not a professional club, but it also extends to there, is we should be thinking about developing better people and better players. And it is about developing better people as well as better players. They're not separate. They go hand in hand, because we're there to do some soccer stuff with them. But yeah, the culture is definitely what you kind of see, hear, feel when you're in and around the place.
You're an expert in this space, but you're also, you've also a really good depth and understanding of the role of data and metrics and measuring everything as well. And I wonder if the fact that these intangibles can't be measured, and the fact that I can say, yeah, I am doing that, but I'm not really. How do we overcome that challenge of awareness, maybe?
Yeah, I think you can measure a culture with employee engagement surveys and satisfaction questionnaires and those kind of things. And they will give you some kind of quantitative measure about how things are doing. And you can do one at the start of the season and one at the end of the season. You can start to track and look at the player engagement or the parent engagement. And you can start to kind of look at things in different ways. I think people have just got to be really clear about what great practice looks like. And if you're really clear about what great practice looks like, are we doing it? And then the conversations linked to accountability then of, look, we said we were going to do this, but you've done this and that's miles away. Therefore, that's not good practice in terms of what we're going after. So I think it's just being really clear for people and saying, look, this is what success looks like for us. This is what good practice is. Now we go and deliver it. And we have to be accountable and trust people to go and do that. And then if they don't, then we have a conversation about what was tricky about it, why couldn't you do it, what was the difficult part. But I think if you have a misalignment between what you say you're going to do and what you do, that's where the issues are. And if those two things don't align, then I think you've got a challenging conversation to have. But if you're really clear on saying that this is what we're about, and not everyone's going to agree with the culture in every club, right? But if you go into it knowing this is what we stand for and you deliver it, cool, you've got a choice. And it's a bit like, we're coming off the back of an England football defeat in the Euros final last night, and it breaks my heart to say that right now. But you can play the game, or Gareth Southgate can play the game at international level in different ways. You don't have to agree with the way that he chooses or the way that another country chooses, but you have a choice. But if we say we're going to do it and then we do it, great.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get into some of the England landscape over the last 10 years and your involvement in that. We'll get into that a little bit later on. I want to stay on the topic of that culture, that sense of the intangibles that you talked about. When you go in, let's just say I bring you over to, let's just say, Club X in the US tomorrow, and I say, Nick, give me a week here. Look at our culture and like, be honest with me. Tell me what's going on. And is your first point of, or I guess, walk through whether you're going, all right, give me all your documentation to see game model standards, all that, or are you kind of walking around with coffees, or how would you gauge that there?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I would certainly have lots of tea drinking moments with different, maybe that's the English in me as well, drinking tea. I would have lots of conversations with people, and look, I'm open and excited to have those conversations. If people want to say, come and give us a week to really get under the skin of it, really starting to go, right, what do we stand for? How do we do it? Do we live what we say we're going to live? And a lot of that comes through conversation. But if you've got a club ethos, document, vision, mission, behaviors, whatever it might be, cultural anchors, whatever language people use, you need to be able to see that alignment between those two things. And often the kind of the metrics of measuring it don't really tell you the full story, but really starting to get to grips with those conversations with people to say, look, where do you see these values play out? What does it look like for you? How do you deliver against these? What are you focusing on? What are your targets? What are your key priorities? How do you know you're achieving those? What are the key results that you're going after? What does success look like? And all of that should feed back and align to that central core strategy of what the club's about. And if we're doing something that doesn't align back to the vision of what the club's about, my next question is, why are you doing it? And it might, that's when you start to get into like kind of hidden personal agendas and individual silos. And I certainly see, and I've always described it as multiple teams playing under one banner. And I wouldn't necessarily say that they were a club, because there's no consistency between anything. The under 11s coaches don't speak to the under 13s coaches. Let alone the under 12s coaches who are the year above them, that have gone through some stuff that's happened before, and some of the little rule changes, and how did they deal with that, and what did you do when you went from 7-a-side to 9-a-side, and how many players did you have, and what strategies and tactics did you use from a football kind of discussion? People don't often have those conversations. So I would argue that you're basically a bunch of individual teams playing under the same name. But it's when you get into that and you can start to really drill down into the conversations is when you start to have the real meat of the conversation then.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's quite similar to the tactical side, that the information overload has helped us in one sense, where it's educated and given us a little bit more awareness, but in the other sense, it's led to more groupthink, because documents are being passed around and logos are being changed, and a little bit of, hey, we're doing this, but we're not really testing what we're doing. And then that silo almost becomes a club silo where everyone is ticking a box. And I wonder if I think of this myself, Nick. I want to get your thoughts on it, about diversity, about balancing maybe. Like I think thinking differently and having different personalities in a club, in a youth structure, would be quite positive, because you're exposing people to different conversations, etc. But then what you're saying there is that Yeah, but if you've everyone going in silos, I mean, how would you manage that where you're not having 25 robots as coaches, but then you're not having 25 people going all different directions?
Yeah, I think there has to be a bandwidth and a bit of a tolerance around that, because I don't think the organizations grow and flourish if you just do it the one way that the person at the top decides. That's not how things grow, because most of the time the best ideas come from people further down. I remember years ago when I started coaching at a Premier League academy, and I don't live too far from London, so I had the choice of going to coach at a couple of academies. One academy gave you the session plan that you had to deliver. Another academy said, here's the theme that we want to work on for the next few weeks. You go and do it. And depending on where you are with your kind of your age and stage of coaching experience, might drive what you want, or the club badge, or the ethos, or whatever it might be. I chose the latter of the two because I didn't want my creativity as a coach to be stifled by, here's the session plan, go and deliver this. I wanted to still challenge myself about thinking about the art and the craft of coaching. And I can certainly see why an organization might do the first one, and certainly in terms of, time of coaches, if they're getting there late, and, we still had some kind of core practices, but the ethos was aligned to me, and it still kind of gave me that bandwidth of tolerance to put my own kind of approach to things. But I think it just comes down to preference then about what that might look like. But I go back to that kind of question of, is what you're doing got a clear alignment to the club philosophy about coaching, training, match day? And if you can draw a line between what you do and the philosophy that we're going after, awesome. We definitely don't want 25 robots. We definitely need to bring that diversity of thinking, diversity of background, ideas, cognition, how they view the world, how they view the game. But it can be really tricky. And I certainly worked at a Premier League club where one coach was very different, and he saw the world very differently, and people saw him as a threat. As a threat to their thinking and their beliefs, and he was quite challenging and direct with it. And as opposed to kind of embracing it and going, right, what can we learn and add and tweak and evolve our coaching and match day philosophy? Because that's what I think good systems do, is that they evolve it. They don't just have a big revolution every 5 years. They naturally kind of test, tweak, repeat along the way. But you have to be within that bandwidth. That's the challenge.
God, it's complex. Like I see that, someone that challenges it and say, all right, well, because there's so many cliches, and I almost think we fall into that trap where it's a little bit John Gordon type, the bus. If you're not on the bus, then we're going. But then how do you then have people that are going to say, yeah, but there's a different way, maybe we can tweak this here? And I think that's a real skill as a leader, because football, I think, is a unique industry as well, especially in England, where there's a lot of threats. There's threats every day in these environments for job security, and you can see why walls go up. But then having flexibility, or I guess bravery as a leader, to say, yeah, critique, let's hear you. It brings us along nicely. You had a post about allowing people to rewrite the rules. With that in mind, then, how would you, as a leader, allow people to chip away and maybe be creative, but still having that vision consistent?
Yeah, I think it goes back to recognizing that the leader, the person at the top of organization, they don't have the best ideas. And often they're quite a long way removed from what's going on in reality. I'll often work in the corporate sector, speaking to lots of clients now, and I'll ask them what's their appetite for risk and new ideas and failure. And often, as we know, right, the best ideas will come from failure and tweaking stuff and trying again and tweaking stuff. But if you've got no idea for failure, or no kind of appetite for failure, you're probably going to stagnate, and people will go past you and evolve quicker. And that's a risk and a threat to organizations. I think we have to start to do a little bit of the same within this. And certainly when we start to look at the young people coming through in the world now, that generation alpha, the young people coming in, they often want more of an input and a decision and a discussion about things that matter to them. And it goes all the way down to the kind of the micro level of a coaching session. And it's how do you as a coach co-create environments with young people to say, what do you think we should do next? Or what do you want to focus on? Or how should we make this practice harder? What should we do now? And it's not just the coach is king or queen and they decide everything that happens because I've written it down on my session plan and this is what I'm going to do. How do we bring people along with us into the environment? And that's where the kind of the rewriting of the rule stuff starts to come together, because they may have better ideas than we do. And often they really do, right? Because, you know, if you've got people running a club organization that might be 40, 50, 60 years old, right? They might be 20, 30, 40 years older than kids today. And kids today are slightly different. They're growing up in a different time. They're the most hyper-connected generation we've ever had, that live in a digital world where everything is, I don't like that, swipe it, change it, swipe it, change it. I expect everything instantly. But we also know that there's a huge increase in loneliness. There's a shift in communication skills because most of their conversations are often through digital tech. We know that there's an increase in social isolation. That makes them a different beast to what the person running the club 50 years old is. So unless we start to understand the world that they're living, we have to work with them to rewrite and evolve. And you can get playful with it, right? You know, you can get really, so I was working with a club where we did a Dragon's Den, which that's not going to translate to the US market. I think what's the program? Is it called Shark Tank? Where they have
Shark Tank,
a load of
Mark Cuban. Yep. Same thing.
Where they have a load of investors and people pitch ideas to them. Right. Okay, cool. My translation of
that's impressive.
of TV programs, it's only because I've seen it on TikTok, so you could have a Shark Tank, right? So you can say to each team, you're going to pitch an idea to the board about what you think our club should look like, stand for, represent. And you can pitch for, I don't know, like $5,000 for your team or whatever it might be. And I'll tell you what, the best ideas will come from them. And you know, the conversations between parents on the side of the pitch where they're chatting away and they're probably moaning about a few things and, I should be doing it. They said, why aren't they doing that? Like, get the parents to have a picture because they'll see stuff differently. And it's those ideas that we have to start to bring a mold and change and go, right, you know, you've probably got some people stood on the side of the pitch as parents that have got incredible skills from their day job and they're just stood on the side of a pitch as a parent, but they're seeing things because nobody has a monopoly of view of the world. And they might be going, well, why don't we change that? Well, why don't we look at doing this? Or we could do that to make the team better or the culture better or the environment better. But if people don't ask them and speak to them and give them a forum, you kind of don't go anywhere and you get stuck in that silo thinking.
Yeah, brilliant. I love that because the skill then as a leader is that forum piece, is to bring it out because, you know, all the things you're talking about there is that, like a coach that's in the trenches is going to be more in tune with what kids need and maybe that little bit of innovation or creativity. But again, like we're now fast approaching, you know more than I do on this. We're probably there where the coaches today are coming from a tech, young leaders are coming from this space where they're maybe uncomfortable with those pieces. So just having a meeting and saying, tell me your thoughts isn't going to be good enough probably anymore as a leader, right? You're going to need to dig a bit deeper than that.
Absolutely. But don't forget, you don't have to take on board everything that they say. Because the skill for the leadership team, the board, the directors, whoever it is to then go, right, how many of that aligns with our culture? How many of that aligns with our strategy? You go back to the vision piece about what you're trying to achieve. What is it that we can take? But even if you take a few bits and not all of it, people like to feel that they've been heard and listened to, and they then feel part of it, and they get a sense of autonomy and ownership. and they feel connected. And that's all human drivers that are really important. And it creates that fostering of a community. Even if their ideas aren't, boom, we are going to go and do that 100%. But it brings people with you on the journey, right?
Moving along nicely, reflection as coaches. So again, something you've written about. I love your videos, by the way. Your LinkedIn stuff, short and sweet. I love them every day. Gets me thinking. The reflection piece is something that, again, I subscribe to. I think it's hugely, it's vital. People can do it in different ways, but it's a fast moving industry. There's noise. It's inconvenient to reflect. Blah blah blah. I guess so you're a leader, you're kind of out of the age range of these young coaches in your club, and you think, listen, you need to think a bit more about how you're doing that. Is it, I guess, how do you teach reflection, or how do you impact that as a collective at your club?
Yeah, I think it's one of those questions I often go back to is we always say people need to reflect, but we never teach them how to, or we never give them any tools or structures about what to do. And the reality is also of coaching is you're either moving very quickly, or you might be a volunteer coach and you've got to go back to looking after the kids, and you're at home and work, and it's quite full on. So just some real simple strategies, just work through in your head what went well, or even better if. Just go, right, well, what was good from tonight's session? What do I need to think about? Yeah, okay, that was cool. That was good. What would have been even better? Or you might just do a stop, start, continue. What are the bits that I need to stop doing that didn't work very well? What can I add to it? What do I need to keep? I often use a framework of different tools to reflect, and I'll probably mix it up a little bit as well, just to kind of challenge my own thinking. There's a various kind of different reflection cycles. I think Kolb's reflection cycle is one. I'll often kind of go keep, add, amend, chuck, because it plays to a lot of different biases that I can try and avoid. And then it goes down to, right, what's the time available that you have in order to do it? So if you're, and many of us do, if you coach with other people, and many of us kind of coach in pairs or with other mums or dads or other coaches, how do you firstly plan your coaching delivery with that coach? So your planning is then deliberate, that, right, I'll do this bit. Gary, when I'm doing this bit, I want you to keep track of my interventions, and I only want to do 3 interventions in this practice. So if I try and stop it 4 times, you stop me within this 15, 20-minute session. I know that you're working on the length of your stoppages in practices. So when you go and coach Gary, I'll keep a clock, and I'll try and keep your questions and interventions down to 60 seconds. Oh, that's clever. And when you start to get to within 10 seconds, I'll give you a little signal, and you can start to wrap it up so the kids can go and play, so that it's not a monologue from the coach. But we can work together on our coaching craft and our coaching practice, right? Then our reflection for you and I as a coaches, you can give me some feedback on my interventions. I can give you the times and the feedback on the length of your interventions, or the quality of your questions, or whatever it is that you want to work upon, right? But the reflection is then specific to something that we want to get better at as a coach. So it's intentional reflection that's directed towards some learning that we want to do. We also know from research, I think it was Smith and Small research in the 80s, that it was something like we forget 80% of our coaching session delivery, right? So if we do forget 80%, invariably the 20% that we hang on to is still probably got a little bit of flaws to it as well. So how do we collect feedback to influence our thinking from the players? How do we ask the players what they like, what they don't like, what would they like more of, what do they like less of? How do we kind of make sure that we kind of gauge some of that? And it's reflection in lots of different ways, because reflection really is just gaining insight to help make your stuff better. That's all what you're trying to do, right? And some of it could be in the car on the way home. It could be as simple as that. You've got a 10-minute drive. So rather than sticking on a podcast or listening to music, just record a voice note and just keep it in your phone and just think out loud about what you're doing, about some of the things that happened, but what your tactics and strategies about reflection after that. So who am I? And I often talk about who's my board of directors, my personal board of directors. So who's the person that I go to talk about coaching? Who's the person I go to talk about sports psychology? Who's the person I go to talk about physical preparation and conditioning, right? And I might have a coaching buddy, and I might just send them my 2-minute, 3-minute voice note from that. And it could be as simple as session tonight. I really struggled with coaching my own son. Like I found myself telling him off more than other kids, and I didn't want to be favoriting him, but I ended up doing the opposite. And I found it really difficult. What advice? Like, give me some advice about how to help with that. Right. So you start to share, and you kind of have networks of coaches to support you around you, but it all aids reflection for what you're doing. And ultimately, it's just having lots of different tools and strategies to do it.
Your presentation, very good. Ontario Soccer, I watched it. A few great points. Maybe think again. You had a couple of pieces. One was the supporting of others. And I wanted to get your thoughts on whether you feel that this is a bit of a blind spot for coaches, perhaps. Again, maybe walls go up and maybe we perceive a weakness if we do what you said. Like, okay, well, if my mentor is coaching at a high level, I don't mind doing that and sending that person there. But God forbid I go to the coach next to me and kind of share a little bit of vulnerability and open up. And do you feel that there? Do you think that's something that we could get better at?
It's a huge opportunity. I think it's a big gap. Having somebody to talk to about coaching is really important. And they could be someone that is a peer, a buddy similar to you. It could be somebody more experienced to you. It could be somebody in a totally different sport, right? And I think having a combination of different people that we can talk to about things is really, really important. And I'm part of what's called the Sussex Coaches Network, which is about 40 coaches across all sorts of different sports. And a couple of times a year we come together. Somebody opens up a clubhouse somewhere and brings some tea bags and some chocolate digestive biscuits, and we just sit and we talk about coaching for a couple of hours, right? There's rarely an agenda, but we comfortably fill 2 hours. Like, you could be there for 6 hours. And I'm taking ideas from athletics coaches, and I'm listening to cricket coaches, and I'm listening to all sorts of different people in different golf coaches. And so you've got individual sports and team sports. You've got different ages and stages. And I always come away with my head bursting with things of, what does that mean to me? How do they do that? Can I go and watch them work? But the support from other coaches is really important. And that network was set up by a golf coach and a disability football coach who just wanted to come together to talk about coaching. And it just takes a couple of volunteers to come together and go, let's just invite people along once a quarter just to chat about coaching. It's not formal. It's not assessed. There's no qualification. It's just because, humans generally are quite social beings, and coaching is quite a social craft. And we live in towns and cities because we like to be around other humans. So there's a real value in just kind of talking and sharing about these things. And it's a really nice platform where people can be vulnerable, and people enter it knowing I don't have all the answers. That's why I'm here, to learn more. And sometimes I might share more than I learn, and sometimes I learn more than I share. But it's just being part of those networks that it helps you feel like you're not alone, I think. And that's important.
The mental health piece as a coach, I think, is hugely important, where, again, information, criticism, overworking in terms of a lot of coaches are, especially in the US, they're well paid, yes, but they're doing 50 things and they're getting criticism from different angles. And that can also lead down a path of burnout and things like that. You do that video, either you're walking or you're running every morning. But coaches, I don't even think there's an onus on coaches on living healthy and being active and getting away and being a bit more deliberate about lifestyle. What do you think about that?
I used to manage a team of very clever people. I was definitely the less smartest in the room, and one of the guys is a coach developer, ex-Olympic athlete, and we were having a conversation about stuff, and through the conversation, I kind of came to the conclusion that nobody has their best ideas sat behind a laptop, right? Invariably, that doesn't happen. And a lot of the time, when I say to people, where do you have your best ideas? They'll often go, in the shower. But nobody says to you, right, we'll go and have more showers. Right? Like that's kind of not how that works. But this guy used to say to me, I have my best ideas when I'm out on the bike and I'm in big spaces and I can think, and I've got the freedom of just kind of being out on my own, and I can spend a bit of time thinking about stuff. So I said to him, like, just in your working day, go out on the bike. Like go out, because I know that he's getting some good quality thinking time where he comes back having rationalized all his thoughts and can put down something meaningful. But he's also getting the physical and mental well-being benefits from doing it. So why wouldn't you? Like, I don't really see a really strong argument. He doesn't work in a call center where he has to be on the phone 100 times a day, right? Like, that's not his job. So why wouldn't you? And I think we're at a time now where people's mental health and well-being is probably more open and being discussed and being valued more. And if people are burning out, there's something wrong with the system, which is either you don't have enough people, or you're trying to do too much, or you're not prioritizing your work well enough. We shouldn't get to the stage where people are burning out. We should get to the stage where we're saying, here's what we think is the appropriate amount of hours per week for you to work. And if you cannot do your job in that amount of time, we have to prioritize and stop doing some things that are of less importance. Invariably, what happens in every organization is someone leaves and someone says, oh, right, that workload can come to you now. And the first question should actually be, well, what do you want me to stop doing if you want me to start doing that? But we don't. We expect the same people to do more work, and we wonder why we break them. Like logically, that doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me. So just be really specific. And if you're at that stage where you're not able to prioritize your own mental health and well-being, have the conversation, and say, look, I'm working, 45, 50 hours a week. And I'm okay doing that. But when my weeks are 70 hours a week, then we might have to start to think about doing that looks differently. Years ago, when I started working at a county FA, like 20 years ago, I'll come into the office at midday and all the office staff would look at me going, like, what are you doing? Why are you in so late? I'm like, because I'm working till 8 o'clock tonight. So my working day is midday till 8 p.m. It's not 9 a.m. till 8 p.m. That's not going to work. It's just not going to happen. So just being really kind of conscious about that, being a bit more deliberate I think it's okay to have those conversations.
Guilt element as well, that I think people feel it because they're working in football, that kind of acknowledging that you are struggling with some of those challenges, you shouldn't be. But in reality, it's energy. It's the same energy that it would be, doing any leadership role, solving problems. I mean, most people's coaching jobs, 90% of it is non-soccer or non-coaching activities, which that's where the breakdown is. But I guess to go back, your previous kind of like an informal social setting where you can get a little bit of empathy and sound it out with people is a really good solution to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you just got to be open and share within the networks that you've got to make sure that you can kind of find the best solutions, but also really start to understand energy. And we did this at the England under-21s at the European Championships. We started to plot out like red, amber, green, when people were full on red, or when they could kind of like dial it back a little bit, and like match day -1 or -2. So that's kind of my language, or football language, for a couple of days before the game. Coaches were pretty full on. They're red. They're working hard to make sure that tactically we're set up and we're coaching, blah, blah, blah. Physios, doctors are in the green. They're not doing a huge amount. You know, they're okay. Things are moving on. Game day, coaches are red. They're full on. Physio, doctor are probably amber now, because if something happens, they need to then like step in and make sure things are working. Game day +1, game day +2, day after. Coaches are probably back to amber or green, and things can kind of dial back a little bit for them. But now the physio and the doctor are probably now in the red, because they're busy fixing people to make sure that everything's back on track and ready to go. But understanding people's different kind of energy is really important.
All right, let's go there then. Let's go to the England piece, where I mean we'll frame it as a change of culture initially. And going back, I read that article on the Guardian about Southgate and the change, and obviously I was aware or remember the issues that the English FA were having, or England as a football culture were having over the last 10, 15 years, coming out of 2010, 2012, Euros, World Cup. What, I guess, to be specific, or to try and ask you a specific question, would be Southgate's role as a leader in the FA. And you talked in that article about taking an interest at the youth levels. Can you talk a little bit about, was that formal? Was that informal? Like, what was the skill behind that there?
Yeah, so I'll probably go back to 2010 was when we had a really big meeting, which was like, it was a root and branch full review of the game with former England managers, with former players across the grassroots game, Premier League, Football League. So it's 14 years ago to kind of get to this point. And when Gareth came in, I can't think his title was Head of Elite Development or something like that. And so Trevor Brooking was leading the football development, and there was a bit of a view that kind of Gareth would be the next Trevor. And he kind of came in, and whilst he was then looking and starting to oversee some of the youth teams' work with Dan Ashworth, he had a real interest in some of the grassroots things that were going on. And that was when I was doing a load of work and projects, and looking at how we change the formats of the game, approach to competition, coaching environments, all of that kind of stuff. But he had a genuine interest in what was going on. And like he came out to countless meetings with me across the country, where we would talk to county FAs, to clubs, to leagues, to coaches. And Gareth was there, like, you know, kind of alongside us, talking about the stuff that he saw with his son and daughter when they were playing sport. And he genuinely cared about what it was all about. And then we started to kind of use Gareth in a bit more strategic ways, that, you know, when you're making such big kind of wholesale changes to the game, invariably it's going to annoy a few people, and they wouldn't be all happy about this. There was one particular county FA where the chairman did not like me because I was suggesting small-sided games, and he thought that, you know, 7 and 8 year old kids should be playing 11v11 on a full-size pitch. So we didn't like the fact I was suggesting that we did something a bit different. But I knew he had a huge ego, right? So we would send Gareth to that meeting, and I wouldn't go, because all of a sudden he looks great because, you know, Gareth Southgate's there and blah, blah, blah. But it was all based on getting to the outcome that we wanted, which was the ability to change the game to make it better for young people. But he genuinely had a big interest in what was going on. And even when he kind of rolled on a few years into getting the seniors job, and actually probably to go back a little bit, when he was the under-21s head coach, he was still really interested in the pathway for who've we got coming through? What does it look like? What does succession planning look like? Phil Foden was probably in the 17s at that stage, but we knew that Phil was a diamond, right? So he would ask questions. What's Phil's pathway look like? How do we get him through into the 21s as quick as we can? What kind of games does he need? What's the environment he needs in order for help him to be the best? Well, that was then no different when he was the seniors manager, because he obviously knew a lot of the 21s, but also he knew who was coming through the pathway. And it's a little bit like years ago at Man United. Sir Alex Ferguson knew everybody across the whole club. He knew all the players, like he knew all the parents, all the way through everything. And I think Gareth was probably quite similar. He knew all the young players coming through now. So when it came to making big decisions about bringing in young players, like, Jude Bellingham at a young age, Habu Menu at a young age, Adam Wharton's in the squad at a young age, he's comfortable in doing that because he knows the players. He's got all the data intelligence. He's seen them. He would have spoken to them. He probably knows their parents. That's the level of detail. But he had this kind of insane curiosity to make sure we did a really good job of connecting the pathway. And I was at the FA a long time. And certainly when I was there, Fabio Capello could give less of a shit about the FA youth teams, not bothered in the slightest, right? Because his focus was solely on the England seniors and winning the World Cup. That's all he was there to do, was not bothered about anything else below it. Sven had a bit more interest. Sven come to the 21s games and certainly paid a bit more interest. I think mainly because Sven was a really nice man. But Gareth was probably the best at wanting to connect the whole pathway all the way through. So brilliant job at that.
Yeah, the piece of the culture in the English FA, and we've had a few people on at different levels, and Michael Scabala, Aaron Danks, people that it just, I always think we're thinking about, again, back to this diversity, again, different skill set, think about a little bit different individual coaches, different coaches in moments. And again, I think I have a great level of respect for that, because they're doing that at cutting edge. Like there was a lot at stake to change that, because if you get that wrong for 6 months, the criticism is going to be, we see it even in the Euros when things are going well, what the criticism is. So I guess when that transition and that innovation, how was that done and achieved or executed, where new ideas, and you talk there about different youth modules coming in, and I guess from an organizational standpoint, what did you see and feel there from a culture?
Yeah, I mean, you have to recognize that, it's a bit like I could go into my garden and plant a load of seeds, but tomorrow I don't have a whole big flowers and vegetables and trees. Like that's not how development happens. We have to recognize, and we did at the time, it was like, look, this is a minimum of a 10-year plan. It's a 10-year plan. And it's really difficult because the size and scale of the sport in this country means that fans have an expectation that you win everything that you go to. But we are a nation who, I think over the last few years, have probably punched above our weight. But the expectation is always greater probably than where we sit in terms of our ability as a nation. And I was at the Toronto Raptors, and I was talking about this with one of their senior members of staff, and they were talking about how they'd gone through a big kind of transition in the team, where they got rid of some of the older players that had been there a long time. They brought in some younger players, but now the developing of a new team and a new generation of players, it takes time. But the average sports fan doesn't get that. They want to see their team win every week now. But I think if you're in the system, you get that you have to be far more long-term and strategic with your thinking, that you're building something here for 8, 10, 12 years' time. And that's the reality of it. So if I look at a lot of kind of teams that go through that transition process, you see some good teams win things, but there'll often be a drop. But the real best ones are able to keep a high level consistently. But just such is the nature now, that I think we've got to that stage where we're doing very well. What Gareth chooses to do next, right? I've got no idea. But it is a very long-term process, but it's also a perfect storm. It's a lot of things coming together at the same time. It's changing youth pathway. It's changing coach education. It's a new program going into Premier League clubs. It's a whole new games program at the Premier League to give players a different experience. It's a whole new games program for international youth teams, giving them some different experiences. And all of that has to come together then with the right manager and the right tactics at the right time for a 1 month period if you're going to win the World Cup. And it is the perfect storm. It's not easy.
EPPP. I've asked a few people this that have come on, and like, because I don't think we talk about this over here. EPPP. Actually, a lot of coaches don't. There's not a lot shared on what it actually is, and we won't go down. We don't have enough time to go down that whole define it and what is it. But I just want to get your thoughts on, like, how much do you think EPPP in terms of formalizing more paperwork around the building, perhaps? And I mean, how much do you think that really, really helped kick on the youth development side?
Yeah, I hugely. It's made a massive difference, and I think Jed Roddy at the Premier League, when he kind of brought that in as a new, not new approach, but a kind of a big shift and change to Premier League youth development. Him and the team that did that needs to take a lot of credit, because what you see at England youth teams and national teams and the seniors, we just borrow the players. They're the club's players. We just borrow them for an event, a tournament, etc. Because most of their development goes on in the clubs. But it is always collective, because the coaches get trained by the FA. So the FA need to have a really clear approach to teaching and learning that really kind of focuses on modern cutting edge approach. But the coaches have to then go and deliver that in a games program set out by the Premier League and the individual clubs. What it has done is it's brought more investment into the game, which has meant more variety in their coaching experiences, more contact time with the players. And I think when you've got players doing some more stuff, some higher quality stuff on some high quality facilities, and playing in a variety of kind of different competition and formats, all of that helps kind of accelerate and turbocharge what we're looking for. Now, the challenge is every other country is doing their own version of it, right, in their own culture, and you can't just cut and paste what the Spanish are doing and apply it to us, because it just doesn't work like that. But there's still lessons that we can learn from other countries to keep evolving our own system. But yeah, it's made a huge difference. It continues to, and I know that there's some very clever people at the Premier League. It's a good group there of forward-thinking staff that are really constantly pushing the cutting edge of what good coaching looks like, which hopefully means the long-term experiences that players are getting better.
I mean, I think that the Premier League is a very, very big marketing machine, and it's well hyped, etc. But I actually think it's underrated in terms of the quality that it produces on a consistent basis as a football product. Is just incredible.
The standard and the quality of it is going up, but you have to keep up with everybody else, because for us in Europe, the Dutch are kicking on, the Spanish are kicking on, the Germans are kicking on, the French are kicking on, the Italians are kicking on, the Portuguese are kicking on. And all of those nations are very good, and will create their own system, their own incredible players at different times. If you don't keep evolving, don't keep moving forwards, then you're rapidly going to be left behind, and then you end up not in that kind of top group of nations, and you end up kind of falling below. I think they still have the challenge that the Premier League is, 70% non-British English players, which makes the challenge for the England manager always really hard, because if you say, right, there's 30% of English players playing in the Premier League, that's already quite a small number. And then you go, right, well, some of them are 17, 18, 20 years old, and they've played 1, 2, 5, 10 games, right? So you're probably not going to pick them. You've also got, Adam Lallana, James Milner, who are 57 years of age and have retired from English football, but are still playing in the Premier League because they're supreme athletes. So you've got either end. So that 30% probably very quickly becomes 22%, right? And we're already quite a small nation when you compare it to other countries that, I don't know what the population of Brazil is, but I would say it's probably 10 times what we have. And culturally, it's, very different, but it's their national sport. And so it's complex. There's so many different factors that have to come together. And ultimately, you've got to do the best you can with the resources that you have available. And if you're, Azerbaijan or Trinidad and Tobago, like, you've got a much smaller resource. So you have to start to think really cleverly about how you apply that in the best way to get the best gains, but with the most sensible expectations of what you're going to achieve from it.
But sensible and expectations don't go together in football, do they? Jeez.
They don't, right? And I think, like I said, I had to do a TV interview this morning, and I think Gareth, as England manager, has probably one of the toughest jobs in the country, right? Oh. So I think being the Prime Minister is probably quite a tough job, but the average person doesn't think they could do that job. The average person thinks they could do Gareth's job better than him. And everyone said to me, like, is he too nice? Like, he is a very nice guy. But he also makes very tough decisions, but he does it in a very humanistic way, which is a real skill about modern leadership. But everybody is an expert in his job. And, if he listened to, some keyboard warrior in wherever having a rant on social media, like, his head would explode and fall off. But Gareth, I think, is sensible enough to go, right, this is the plan. This is what we're going to do based on all the information that everybody's given us. This is how we're going to approach things. This is what we're going to go after, and how we're going to do it. And, I think even dropping big players, Jack Grealish, Marcus Rashford before the Euros, which probably would have been quite unpopular decisions in some parts. He's gone, no, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And the early stages, when they certainly didn't do amazing through the groups and people were losing their minds because we were top of the group and qualified, and people couldn't cope that. Like, it's a thankless job. It really is a thankless job. But thankfully, I think we'll probably look back and I'm not saying that Gareth will leave, but my guess is he might do. We might look back in 5 years and go, can we have him back? Because it's such a challenging job.
Yeah, that's definitely going to happen. Like, that's Bobby Robson in Newcastle, isn't it? But fourth or fifth in the Premier League, and they get relegated to. Not to say it's going to go down, but you just, in football, you always think you can do better. But as you know, if you're in the business, it can get 20 times worse at all times. You don't really appreciate that as a fan, I don't think.
Yeah, and again, I think if they don't necessarily recognise that, people watch the game and say, like, for my naked eye, we need to do this. And sometimes it is obvious, right? But Gareth is also making decisions based upon the fact he's got 500 pieces of information from 35 experts around him. And he's got to distill that down very quickly into high pressure decision making in an instant, which is very different to, Colin from Liverpool, who sat on his sofa watching it, shouting at the telly. It's a very different place to be. And with the greatest respect to Colin, I'd probably rather have Gareth in charge of the national team.
Brilliant. All right, I promised we wouldn't go down that road, and we just did. Last one for you. I don't want to take up too much time. What's the, for coaches that are listening that are saying, oh, you know what, I would love to dig a bit deeper, and we mentioned it earlier, you're doing some corporate work. Are you open to going to clubs as well, or what are you doing these days?
Yeah, so I'm running my own consultancy now, which gives me the opportunity and flexibility to just do projects that I want to do. And I've made this decision that with my own work, that I'm only doing fun stuff with cool people, right? So if it doesn't tick those boxes, then I'm not doing it. But spend a lot of time going out to clubs, to organisations, and mainly just to kind of ask them some difficult questions and challenge some of their thinking. Test are they doing what they say they're doing, giving them some ideas, helping coaches get better. A lot of my work is spent kind of looking at how do we maximize the potential in individuals and also create some high performing teams. So I spend a lot of time with different sports, big clubs, small clubs, grassroots, professional game, across lots of different sports, looking at, right, well, if we're a team, what does a high performing team look like? What's clarity in our vision and our objectives and key results? How do we make sure people have got clarity and competence and autonomy about how they do it? What are our values, relationships, cultural anchors about what we stand for? How do we do it in our ways of working? And start to kind of help them shape their own strategy. This is never me coming in, telling you, the expert in your club, Gary, how to do it. But it's me going, oh, have you thought about that? And what does this look like for you? And the best teams in the world have thought about this. And what do you really stand for? And what are the behaviors? And if I see this, what happens? And just kind of prompting a lot of thinking and questions. But sometimes that's kind of immersing myself in a club for a few days. Sometimes it's just coming over, doing a keynote or a speech to coaches and organizations about whether it's some key stuff on coaching or high performing teams, whatever it might be. But lots of different things, but lots of fun stuff. So Rivers of Thinking is the consultancy that I've set up. But there's a few of us now doing bits and pieces around the world, which is it's good fun.
Brilliant, outstanding. We will put the information, if you don't mind, we'll put the information below, and people can check that out. And Nick, I really appreciate this. It's been fantastic. I've loved it.
No problem. Look, I appreciate the opportunity to come and chat. It's it feels like it's a long time overdue. It's the clarity on having a strategy about what you're doing and what is that all kind of, how do you piece all of the different component parts together, and then going, right, get the right people in the right seats, and then let's go on this journey together. And sometimes I think, and we had a little bit at the FA at the time, sometimes it's change the people or change the people. You have to recognize that there might be a little bit of collateral damage if they don't want to come in line with where we're going, and sometimes that's okay. But this is what we're doing. This is the course of action, and everything is always driven by, will it make the boat go faster, to parlance a rowing term. And if it does, awesome, let's do it. And if it doesn't, then we probably shouldn't do it.
Fantastic. Top class. Nick, thank you so much. Keep up the great work, and keep those videos coming.
Well, mainly it's just a ramble to get stuff out of my head, to be honest, because it's a lot. It's whether it's any good or not, who knows, right? But it certainly helps me.
Top class. Thanks again, Nick. Much appreciated.
No problem at all.